Welcome to the Monday evening masterclass. We are going to do our talk tonight. Normally we do Ayurveda, but this is an Ayurvedic term, but it's a term that you hear mostly in yoga, and that is samskara. So we're going to talk about samskara and what samskara is, what it means. I want to mention a really great book and resource for people out there. And this is not a yoga book, but he talks about samskaras in this book. And it's written by Michael Singer. And here's the book, you guys. It's called Living Untethered. Anyway, he wrote the book called The Untethered Life. And I read it. I got halfway through and it seemed a little redundant to me. And so I didn't get through the whole thing. But this Living Untethered is very different because he talks about how to not only identify thoughts and how to deal with thoughts, but he literally breaks it down on what's going on. He goes into our biology and then how to deal with all this stuff. And he talks about samskaras as impressions, and that's how we talk about them in yoga. A samskara is an impression. So the example that he gives in the book, which is a fantastic example, is when plasma TVs first came out, they used to say, be really careful not to freeze your screen on, just like pause it for too long on one particular picture. It's so like, people have their way of recording things and they would pause their show. And then if you walked out the door and left it like that for a few hours, and then eventually the TV gets turned off, the next time you watch TV, whatever frozen picture was on that when you paused it, it now appears in the background on your next show when you start watching TV again. So you're watching the screen and behind it is the impression of that picture. And that's basically how we go through life. Something happens and then we develop preferences. And we're developing preferences of what we like, what we don't like, but those are impressions. Those are impressions. And then we develop in samskaras and impressions around events. And something happens in our life that's traumatic. And now anytime you see something that relates to anything around that situation, then it causes trauma, right? And people go into, they're reacting. And what we do in yoga, every time you do yoga, you are helping to unravel these samskaras, these impressions. It's a huge, big thing to consider because otherwise we are walking around with the shadows and the impression of everything that has ever happened to us in our life. And then you no longer experience life in this moment. You're always experiencing life based on your samskaras, based on what your impressions are, the life that you've led, whatever your experiences have had, and all the preferences, good, bad, right, wrong, that you've developed over the years. All those impressions are what's creating our ability to enjoy or not enjoy life. And so people end up being, miserable through life and suffer because we're constantly stuck in our samskaras. So how do we release samskaras? Well, yoga is one way. Yoga is one way of releasing samskaras because we are trying to open up the energy channels and remove blocks, remove stagnation. And remember, the impressions are like a shadow or like a film that gets moved, that is over us. And what happens when have you guys ever cooked with grease? I went into a kitchen that I had to clean one time and they must have just cooked with grease every day. It was disgusting. And the layers of grease was so thick. It took me hours. And that's kind of what happens is there's like a film that covers our ability to enjoy this moment, enjoy this life. We're always suffering because we're living through our impressions and our samskaras. So yoga is a way of opening this up And I have a really great book that is one of my very favorite yoga books. It's called The Heart of Yoga by Deskachar. And his dad was BKS Iyengar and Patabi Joyce, which are two very famous yogis. He was their teacher. And I really like his book because it's thorough. It's very thorough. And it's more based on the tantric tradition as a whole, whereas Iyengar's book is more like therapeutic. You look at this pose and it shows you, hey, here's the pose, here's all the benefits, here's how you do it. And it's more like a catalog book. It's also fantastic for opening up and going, oh yeah, look, Trikonasana does all these things. It's tridoshic. Okay, so samskaras, I want to just read you a definition. It's the conditioning of the mind that lets it continually take the same direction. So when you have a thought that then becomes a belief, then it becomes a behavior and it becomes a pattern. So it means that you're just living out the same thoughts over and over and over. And if you don't have a meditation practice, I would highly recommend that you start one, because one of the things that meditation does is you allow yourself to be still so that all of the mind thoughts can unravel. So I always tell everybody, they're like, oh, I can't settle my mind. Well, at first, just be still so that the spinning top of the mind can start to wind down. You got to let the mind wind down. You got to hold that space so that it can start to calm down. And then what you start to realize is, oh, I think the same thoughts over and over all day long, over and over and over. And then how can we detach from that? Realize those are just samskaras. Those are just impressions. And then start to experience this moment and live in this moment by feeling it, by doing practices like yoga, pranayama, meditation, and it helps us to embody ourselves. So samskara is, it's the sum total of all of our actions that conditions us to behave in a certain way. And like I said, samskara is an impression. It's not all bad. Sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's negative, but they're all impressions and they all create the film. They keep us from experiencing our authentic self. Okay. So when we do yoga, we are going to help release some of that and open ourselves up. Just remember that that's what you're doing. I am going to relax in this practice today and help my body release what creates these stuck impressions so that I'm seeing things for the first time, right? And he like has a story about this Buddhist monk, and he was saying that he walks past the same tree every day, and then he sees the tree and it reminds him of his childhood, and then he sees the tree again and it reminds him of what he's doing today, and then he sees the tree again and it reminds him of his grandparents and what's going to come in the future. And then one day something shifted in him and he no longer saw the tree through any of that. He just was experiencing the tree and the oneness of the tree. So it no longer was about his past impressions, his future, his family, or any of that. It was just experiencing the tree. And that's what we want. We want to experience this moment fully, authentically. And then when we are in our impressions, start to be that witness and see when, okay, here it goes. And that's okay. And you allow yourself to be in that. And then we start to pull out of it through different practices. So we're not living through our samskaras anymore. We release them. Okay. If you have any questions on that, reach out to me. Okay. So that's our talk for tonight. It's a good one. And I would highly recommend that book. Okay. It's Living Untethered. Now, I just got it on audio. That's the only way I can do it. If I try to read, I fall asleep.